Hollywood buried some of its greatest masterpieces in the 1950s, not because they were bad, but because audiences simply were not ready for them. Did you know one of these films was so despised at its premiere that the director never made another movie again? These 5 forgotten gems predicted the future of cinema, decades before anyone else caught on. Let us dig them up. Number 5, Ace in the Hole, 1951. Billy Wilder was already a Hollywood legend when he dropped this absolute firecracker on unsuspecting audiences, and they rejected it so violently that Paramount Pictures practically disowned the film overnight. This is the movie that was decades ahead of its time, a savage indictment of media sensationalism that feels more relevant today than it did over 70 years ago. Kirk Douglas delivers what might be the most morally reprehensible performance of his entire career, playing a washed-up journalist named Chuck Tatum, who stumbles upon the story of a lifetime and decides to exploit it for everything it is worth. The premise is devastatingly simple. A man gets trapped in a cave collapse in New Mexico, and Tatum realizes he can manipulate the rescue operation to drag out the story for maximum newspaper coverage. He literally delays the man's rescue to boost his own career. The audacity of this narrative in 1951 cannot be overstated. Audiences walked out of theaters in droves because they could not stomach watching an American hero character behave with such calculating cruelty. Kirk Douglas fought hard for this role because he understood something the public did not. He saw the ugliness lurking beneath America's obsession with tragedy and spectacle. His performance is magnetic and repulsive in equal measure. You cannot look away from him even as you want to reach through the screen and strangle him. Douglas plays Tatum with a wolfish hunger that makes every scene crackle with uncomfortable energy. Billy Wilder later called this his most personal film, and you can feel his cynicism dripping from every frame. The director had survived Nazi Germany and witnessed firsthand how propaganda could manipulate the masses. He brought that experience into this scathing portrait of American media culture, and audiences punished him for it. The film was such a commercial disaster that Paramount changed its title to The Big Carnival, hoping to salvage something from the wreckage. It did not work. Critics at the time were split right down the middle. Some recognized brilliance, while others accused Wilder of being unnecessarily cruel and cynical. The New York Times called it bitter and disagreeable. Variety suggested it was too harsh for mainstream audiences. But here's the thing that nobody talks about. Wilder predicted reality television, 24-hour news cycles, and social media exploitation of tragedy with terrifying accuracy. He saw where journalism was heading before anyone else even suspected it. The production itself was ambitious beyond anything Wilder had attempted before. He built an entire fake town in the New Mexico desert and created a carnival atmosphere around the cave rescue that mirrors exactly what happens today when tragedy strikes and the cameras show up. The attention to detail is extraordinary, from the souvenir stands selling merchandise to the crowds gathering like vultures around the trapped man's suffering. Jan Sterling plays Tatum's reluctant accomplice, a local woman married to the trapped man who quickly realizes she can profit from her husband's misfortune. Her performance is equally chilling because she represents the audience that Wilder was criticizing. She learns to play the media game from Tatum and becomes just as complicit in the exploitation. The film refuses to let anyone off the hook. Modern filmmakers have openly admitted that Ace in the Hole influenced everything from Network to Nightcrawler to every media satire that followed. Spike Lee championed the film's restoration. Martin Scorsese called it one of the greatest films ever made about American corruption. The Criterion Collection gave it the deluxe treatment it deserved, decades after its initial failure. This is vindication of the highest order for a movie that was considered too dark and too honest for its own good. Number 4, Sweet Smell of Success, 1957. Alexander McKendrick came to America with a reputation for making charming British comedies, and then proceeded to create the most acidic, venomous portrait of New York City power brokers that Hollywood had ever seen. This film is pure poison served on a silver platter, featuring dialogue so sharp it could slice through steel and performances so intense they leave permanent marks on your psyche. Burt Lancaster and Tony Curtis engage in a twisted dance of manipulation that remains unmatched in cinema history. Lancaster plays J.J. Hunsaker, a newspaper columnist modeled on the infamous Walter Winchell, who could make or break careers with a single sentence. His power is absolute, and his cruelty is boundless. Curtis plays Sidney Falco, a desperate press agent who will do literally anything to get back into Hunsaker's good graces. The relationship between these two men is parasitic and fascinating, predator and prey locked in a death spiral that destroys everyone around them. The script was written by Clifford Odets and Ernest Lehman, and every single line crackles with intelligence and menace. This is dialogue that demands to be quoted. When Hunsaker describes someone as having the scruples of a guinea pig and the morals of a gangster, you understand exactly what kind of world you have entered. The language is brutal and beautiful and completely intoxicating. Tony Curtis took an enormous risk with this role because it destroyed his pretty boy image completely. He plays Sidney Falco as a sweating, groveling weasel who sells out everyone, including himself, for the slightest crumb of approval from the powerful columnist. Critics initially dismissed his performance as too extreme, but modern audiences recognize it as one of the bravest choices any leading man made during the studio system era. Curtis proved he was far more than a handsome face. Burt Lancaster is genuinely terrifying as Hunsaker. He barely moves throughout the entire film, sitting in his booth at the famous 21 Club, like a spider waiting for flies to stumble into his web. His stillness makes him more menacing than any explosive outburst could achieve. When he finally does unleash his fury, the effect is devastating because you have been waiting for it the entire time. Cinematography by James Wong Howe deserves its own paragraph of praise. He shot New York City at night like it was the seventh circle of hell, all harsh shadows and neon glare and faces emerging from darkness. The visual style influenced everything from film noir to modern crime dramas. Directors still study his work on this film because nobody has ever made Manhattan look more beautiful and more dangerous simultaneously. United Artists had no idea how to market this movie to audiences expecting a typical melodrama. The promotional campaign was confused and ineffective, and the film died a quiet death at the box office. Critics dismissed it as too cynical and too unpleasant. Audiences wanted escapism and entertainment, not a mirror held up to the ugliest aspects of American ambition and corruption. But time has been extraordinarily kind to Sweet Smell of Success. The film is now studied in universities as a masterclass in screenwriting and visual storytelling. Martin Scorsese cites it as a major influence on his own work. The dialogue has been quoted in countless other films and television shows. What audiences in 1957 found repellent, modern viewers find exhilarating and disturbingly relevant. The relationship between Hunsaker and his sister adds another layer of deeply uncomfortable subtext that 1950s audiences could not handle. Lancaster insisted on playing these scenes with an intensity that pushed boundaries of what was acceptable on screen. Suggestion of obsessive possessiveness made censors nervous and audiences squirm. Today we recognize it as sophisticated psychological storytelling that was simply too far ahead of its time. Our number 3, Night of the Hunter, 1955. Charles Laughton directed exactly one film in his entire career, and it is an absolute masterpiece that audiences completely rejected because they had never seen anything like it before and had no framework for understanding what they were watching. This is the movie that killed a directing career before it even began, and the tragedy of that fact cannot be overstated. Laughton never stepped behind the camera again because the failure devastated him so completely. Robert Mitchum delivers the performance of his lifetime as Reverend Harry Powell, a traveling preacher with love and hate tattooed on his knuckles, who marries and murders widows for their money. His portrayal of religious hypocrisy and charming evil remains one of the most chilling villain performances in cinema history. Mitchum understood the assignment completely and created something unforgettable. The visual style is unlike anything Hollywood produced in the 1950s. Laughton drew inspiration from German expressionism and silent film techniques to create a dreamlike nightmare atmosphere that feels like a dark fairy tale come to life. The famous shot of the drowned woman underwater with her hair flowing like seaweed is one of the most haunting images ever committed to celluloid. Cinematographer Stanley Cortez worked miracles with light and shadow. Shelley Winters plays the doomed widow Willa Harper, and her performance is heartbreaking in its naivety. She represents all the good Christian folks who get fooled by charismatic monsters wearing religious masks. Her wedding night scene contains some of the most uncomfortable dialogue ever written for a major Hollywood production. Film suggests things about faith and manipulation that audiences in 1955 simply could not accept. The children who flee from Powell down the river provide the emotional core of the entire story. Laughton directed young Billy Chapin and Sally Jane Bruce with extraordinary sensitivity, coaxing performances from child actors that feel authentic and terrifying. Their journey downriver is shot like something from a Brothers Grimm fairy tale, beautiful and menacing in equal measure. Lillian Gish appears in the final act as Rachel Cooper, a tough elderly woman who takes in orphan children and provides the only safe harbor in the entire film. Her confrontation with Powell is legendary, featuring the old woman with a shotgun singing hymns while the predator lurks outside her door. Gish was a silent film legend, and Lawton cast her deliberately to connect his modern nightmare with cinema's mythological past. Critics in 1955 were genuinely confused by what Lawton had created. The mixture of horror, comedy, fairy tale, and religious allegory did not fit any existing category. Some dismissed it as pretentious. Others found it too frightening for family audiences, but not adult enough for sophisticated viewers. The film fell through the cracks of every possible demographic. United Artists released the movie with a marketing campaign that had no idea how to sell it. The trailers emphasized Mitchum's villain, but gave audiences the impression they were getting a conventional thriller. When the dreamlike imagery and expressionist style appeared on screen, viewers felt betrayed. Word of mouth killed the film faster than any bad review could. The rehabilitation of Night of the Hunter began in France, where the Cahiers du Cinéma critics recognized its genius immediately. Over the following decades, American critics slowly came around to understanding what Lawton had accomplished. By the 1990s, the film was being hailed as one of the greatest American films ever made. Lawton did not live to see this vindication, having died in 1962 still believing his directorial effort was a failure. Modern horror directors cite this film constantly as a primary influence. The imagery of Powell silhouetted against the night sky, the underwater shots of the murdered woman, the river journey through a dangerous fairy tale landscape. These visuals have been borrowed and reimagined countless times. Lawton created a visual vocabulary for cinematic terror that is still being studied and imitated today. Number 2. Rififi, 1955. Jules Dassin was blacklisted by Hollywood during the McCarthy era and fled to Europe, where he proceeded to create the greatest heist film ever made, a French masterpiece that revolutionized an entire genre and influenced every single robbery movie that followed. This is the film that established the rules for heist cinema, and every filmmaker who has attempted the genre since owes Dassin an enormous debt. The centerpiece of Rififi is a 30-minute heist sequence that contains absolutely no dialogue and no music. For half an hour, 4 men systematically break into a Parisian jewelry store while the audience watches in breathless silence. The tension is unbearable. Every small sound echoes like thunder. A dropped tool becomes catastrophic. An alarm nearly goes off. The sweat is practically visible on the screen. Nobody had ever attempted anything like this before. Dassin had to shoot the film on an almost non-existent budget with actors who were not stars. The production limitations forced creativity that major studio films could never achieve. The heist sequence was shot in real time with minimal coverage because they simply could not afford multiple takes. This constraint created authenticity that bigger budget films struggle to replicate. The story follows Tony LeStefanois, a recently released convict who assembles a team for one final job. Jean Servais plays Tony with weary dignity, a man who knows this business will destroy him but cannot escape its gravitational pull. His performance is understated and powerful, providing emotional weight to what could have been a simple exercise in procedural filmmaking. Dassin cast himself as César Le Milanais, the safecracker who makes the heist possible. He took the role partly because he could not afford to hire another actor, and partly because he understood exactly how the character should move and breathe during the silent robbery sequence. His performance is almost entirely physical, communicating everything through gesture and expression. French critics immediately recognized Rififi as something special. The film won Best Director at Cannes and became an international sensation. What is remarkable is how American audiences eventually embraced it despite never receiving a major theatrical release in the United States. The film spread through art house screenings and eventually home video, building a devoted following decade by decade. The influence of this one movie on cinema history is staggering. The Italian Job, Heat, Ocean's 11, Mission Impossible. Every heist film you have ever loved borrowed something from Rififi. The template Dassin established became the blueprint that everyone followed. The planning sequence, the assembly of specialists, the complications during execution, the aftermath where everything falls apart. All of it starts here. The violence in the film was considered shocking for 1955. Dassin did not romanticize the criminal lifestyle or allow his protagonists easy escapes. The consequences of choosing this path are brutal and final. The film has a moral center that prevents it from glorifying theft, even while making the heist itself thrillingly entertaining to watch. Dassin later admitted that his exile from Hollywood was both the worst and best thing that happened to his career. Without the blacklist, he never would have made Rififi. He never would have been forced to work with minimal resources in a foreign country, in a language he barely spoke. The constraints that seemed like punishments became creative advantages that produced a masterpiece. The technical precision of the heist sequence has been studied by actual criminals, which is both a compliment and a concern. Police departments reportedly use the film to understand how professional thieves think and operate. Dassin created such an authentic portrayal of breaking and entering that it functioned almost like a tutorial. This realism remains the gold standard for the genre. Number 1, Kiss Me Deadly, 1955. Robert Aldrich made the most insane, prophetic, and genuinely dangerous film of the entire decade. A fever dream disguised as a detective thriller that predicted nuclear apocalypse, suggested the end of the world as we know it, and contained imagery so powerful that it influenced 50 years of filmmaking that followed. This is not just a forgotten gem. This is a bomb waiting to detonate in the minds of anyone who discovers it. Ralph Meeker plays Mike Hammer as an absolute brute, stripping away any romanticism from the hard-boiled detective archetype and revealing the ugly core underneath. He is cruel, violent, and motivated entirely by greed. Aldrich and Meeker transformed Mickey Spillane's pulp hero into something genuinely disturbing, a man you would cross the street to avoid in real life. The protagonist is barely distinguishable from the criminals he fights. The opening sequence is one of the most iconic in cinema history. A barefoot woman runs desperately down a dark highway, her breathing the only sound on the soundtrack. She flags down Hammer's sports car, and within minutes, the audience is thrown into a conspiracy involving murder, torture, and something called the Great What's-It that everyone is willing to kill for. The Great What's-It turns out to be a box containing something that glows and burns anyone who opens it. The final revelation is nuclear material, making Kiss Me Deadly one of the first films to grapple with atomic age anxiety in such a direct and terrifying way. Mushroom Cloud ending, with characters destroyed by forces they cannot understand or control, predicted fears that would dominate culture for decades. Aldrich shot the film with disorienting camera angles and harsh lighting that makes Los Angeles look like an alien landscape. The visual style is aggressive and confrontational, refusing to let audiences settle into comfortable viewing. Every frame feels slightly wrong, slightly dangerous. The city becomes a maze of shadows and threats where nobody can be trusted. The violence in Kiss Me Deadly shocked censors and audiences alike. Hammer tortures suspects for information. Women are brutalized and murdered. The film refuses to look away from the consequences of violence in ways that 1950s cinema rarely attempted. Aldrich was making a statement about American masculinity and aggression that went completely over most viewers' heads. French New Wave directors worshipped this film. François Truffaut and Jean-Luc Godard cited it as a primary influence on their revolutionary approach to cinema. They recognized that Aldrich was doing something subversive with the detective genre, using its conventions to critique American culture and Cold War paranoia. What American audiences dismissed as trashy, European intellectuals celebrated as groundbreaking. The film was considered so dangerous that some countries banned or heavily censored it. The ending was changed for certain markets because the original conclusion was deemed too nihilistic. The idea that opening a mysterious box could trigger apocalypse was too close to actual nuclear fears to be comfortable entertainment. Aldrich had touched a nerve that nobody wanted examined. Quentin Tarantino has spoken extensively about how Kiss Me Deadly influenced Pulp Fiction, particularly the glowing briefcase that characters obsess over without ever revealing its contents. Alex Cox made an entire documentary about the film. David Lynch borrowed its dreamlike noir atmosphere. The influence spreads through American cinema like radiation from that fictional box. Contemporary reviews were mixed at best and hostile at worst. Critics complained about the excessive violence and nihilistic worldview. Audiences expecting a conventional detective story were confused and disturbed by what Aldrich delivered. The film died quietly at the box office, dismissed as an ugly entry in a disreputable genre. But time has elevated Kiss Me Deadly to its rightful place among the most important American films of the 1950s. The Criterion Collection restored it. Film scholars write academic papers analyzing its themes. Directors openly admit to stealing from it. What was once considered exploitation trash is now recognized as visionary art that saw the darkness at the heart of American culture before anyone else dared to look. Those are 5 forgotten 1950s masterpieces that deserve immediate rediscovery. Drop a comment telling me which one you are watching first, and let me know if there is another buried treasure from this decade that should have made the list. Here is my challenge for you. Hollywood rejected these films because audiences were not ready for their darkness and honesty. Are modern audiences actually any different? Or do we just pretend to appreciate challenging cinema while still demanding comfortable entertainment?